Climate is all over the news right now. We're hearing a lot about an upcoming climate meeting in Glasgow, Scotland. What this is about, it's the 26th Conference of the Parties meeting, an annual meeting that takes place among the countries that are parties to UN climate agreements. But this one is especially important because it marks the 5-year mark since the Paris Agreement was ratified. And every 5 years, countries are due to bring new and updated goals to the table at this meeting. And so this is the first time that countries have been required or expected to bring new goals to the meeting. And so the world is really watching what happens at Glasgow, whether countries bring more ambitious goals with them and the kinds of things that they agree to for both mitigation of emissions and also financing of actions that take place in countries that can't afford to take some of those actions themselves. This is a really important, really highly anticipated meeting. With the upcoming climate meeting in Glasgow, I often get the question, okay, countries are supposed to bring new commitments, but are they ambitious enough? Are we getting there? And the question is that we're making some progress, but maybe not ambitious enough just yet. If you look at the sum total of commitments that have been announced in advance of Glasgow, we still have emissions expected to rise by 2030, whereas to meet the overall goals of the agreement, we really need emissions to start to fall. And so we're getting there. We're definitely ahead of where we were 5 years ago when the Paris Agreement is signed, but we still need more ambition and more action. And I think we'll see more of that over time as technologies get less expensive and easier to deal with. But another thing I'm looking for at Glasgow that I'm more hopeful about is financing for actions taking place in the developing world. There are a lot of places in the world that need additional money to make investments in both climate emissions reductions, but also adaptation to deal with the amount of climate change that's already baked in. And I'm hopeful on this front that wealthier countries will come together and pledge more money to help these countries adapt. We can't do it all with government money, so I'm hoping that they can use government money to bring in more private money and really get the ball rolling on green energy investments and adaptation investments in countries that need it.
One of the questions that I always get asked is what will the impact of COP26 and other climate conferences be on companies? Well, companies will face a significant impact due to the regulations that each country implements in order to achieve each country's commitment to reduce greenhouse gases under COP26 and the earlier Paris Agreement under COP21. One of the most important tools among policymakers to induce emissions reductions is carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is currently being implemented all around the world, and basically it puts a price on every ton of CO2 that a company emits. And thereby it forces companies to internalize the negative externalities associated with greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon pricing will help us transition towards a low-carbon future and is one of our critical tools to achieve the climate goals outlined in COP26.
The U.S. can reestablish its global climate leadership by highlighting just how grounded its climate strategy is in the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. The administration's strategy for reaching its new ambitious target on climate mitigation goes far beyond just mitigation alone and includes things such as improving public health, creating good quality jobs, and advancing environmental justice. It's a recognition that solving climate change has to be linked to other social and economic issues, or it won't be successful. And that's exactly the premise of the SDGs. So the Biden administration can link their climate goals to the SDGs to rebuild their credibility in the UN, reinforce how willing the U.S. is to be a constructive partner in the global community, and they can even leverage the other leaders from across the U.S., such as mayors and governors, who are already combining the climate agenda with the SDGs. The Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, provide the perfect platform for the U.S. to advance racial equity in its climate change plans. The SDGs focus on leaving no one behind, so they force national governments to undertake policy with the most marginalized or the most vulnerable in mind. And President Biden has outlined environmental justice as one of the key objectives of the U.S. climate strategy. So linking the SDG targets to its objectives makes perfect sense because it would force the U.S. to disaggregate data and measure progress on its objectives by race. And an easy place to pilot this approach is with the Justice 40 initiative, which is an initiative that the administration has outlined to ensure that 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy actually flow to disadvantaged communities.